everyone, welcome to another Book Review Wednesday, and today I thought I would do something sort of similar to what I did with the Harry Potter series and sort of briefly discuss the Lord of the Rings series in a more general sense, as opposed to going in depth into each story and sort of more talk about their impact on storytelling, literature, and other forms of entertainment media. So without further ado, let me sort of address the Lord of the Rings series, and this includes The Hobbit, which is technically a prequel to the Lord of the Rings series, but I still like to tie it in there because what ends up happening within The Hobbit really ends up tying into what happens within Lord of the Rings, even though they are completely different works. They still sort of revolve around the same thing, which is the One Ring, and hence we get the Lord of the Rings. But basically, the author, who is J.R.R. Tolkien, he's actually a writer that really dedicated his literary and writing career to this Middle Earth. The majority of his works do focus on this universe, this world of hobbits and elves and dwarves, and you'll notice too that the culture that is created within Middle Earth really resembles medieval British culture. You'll see this in how things are presented, and how there's kings, and there's largely sword fighting and castles and things of that nature. So it does revolve around some British lore. The whole culture that was built up for that really does showcase itself within the Lord of the Rings series. I guess you could make that similar argument too with other stories that have revolved more around British medieval history. For example, Ivanhoe is largely based within medieval history, and Lord of the Rings is similar in that respect, except it's more based within fiction rather than Ivanhoe, which I would consider to be a lot more realistic than something like Lord of the Rings. So it does, again, have these very interesting cultural elements that resemble the British culture. There's even it was even mentioned too that the hobbits as a race were sort of inspiration for Tolkien from an actual group of people that lived in Britain. So again, he is drawing, I think, a lot of that similar cultural influence that was maybe very important to him as a child, and sort of showcasing that within his literary works. I think that's something that's really, really significant when it comes to these stories, that they're largely based within the culture that he surrounded himself with and was sort of a part of. Now, I believe J.R.R. Tolkien, he served in World War I, and I think that had a very huge impact on his life, and hence I think we get these very powerful stories as a result. I think that he went through a lot during that war, and I think this really is showcased within his works too, where there is a lot of battles. There's a lot of discouragement. There's a lot of struggle. These kinds of things, I think, really resembled a lot of the things that he went through in life, and I think he really wanted to showcase that within his material. And I think it only makes sense that Lord of the Rings would be a sort of a perfect outlet to sort of express that, and sort of, I guess, the nature too of good and evil, which is really a big significant portion of the book when it comes to themes, or book series when it comes to themes. The interesting thing too is how Tolkien's work has transitioned into other forms of media too. Probably the most famous trilogy of all time that has come out, at least recently, is the Lord of the Rings series. Maybe the most recent is Toy Story, the Toy Story series, but again, this is a trilogy based upon a extensive amount of literary material. And I would say that it does follow the books relatively closely, although there are times where it does meander and it doesn't end. The films don't end in the same point as when the book ends. Like the transitioning is kind of off. But I think that they both work as interesting interpretations. And the thing that I think makes Tolkien's work so fascinating is the amount of detail. This world, Middle Earth, that he created is very, very structured. There's a lot of different things. There's even different languages too, like Elvish. That's a whole language that he just made up, which I'm sure is primarily based within similar languages that he's seen throughout history. And again, I think there's a lot of history within Lord of the Rings, even though a lot of the things within Lord of the Rings don't seem like that they would realistically happen within history. I think a lot of inspiration from history came from these books, came from other parts of history into these books, basically. And I really do admire the amount of detail he puts into these aspects. Usually you don't see that within a lot of literary works. For example, Harry Potter, although it does have certain amounts of context when it comes to the wizarding world, it's definitely not as structured or as detailed or as well explained, I'd say, as Lord of the Rings, as a series, or as a universe within itself. The Lord of the Rings universe, technically the Middle Earth universe, is a lot more detailed, a lot more specific, and has a lot more structures and layers to it than something like the Wizarding World. So I would understand that as far as a more adult work goes, there is a lot more to explore with Lord of the Rings than there is Harry Potter. And I think that's why Lord of the Rings in particular has fascinated lots of people, in particular people who enjoy fantasy and who enjoy taking things from history and incorporating it into a completely different fantasy type world. And I think it really works in particular with this series of books, including Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit prequel. So without further ado, let me sort of address a little bit of the things that these series of books tries to address. The interesting thing about Lord of the Rings is, as a series, is that it focuses on one journey throughout all the books, basically. It's not like one book where one journey ends and then another journey begins. It's all tied into one thing, which is kind of similar to Harry Potter, but again, I think Harry Potter is sort of the two together, where you have one adventure and then another adventure, but then it basically is all leading up to the same thing, which is to defeat the bad guy. And here, Lord of the Rings completely goes for leading up to defeating the bad guy, all within the series. And there's a lot more characters, I'd say, in Lord of the Rings. And there's a lot more depth, I think, to the characters in Lord of the Rings than something like Harry Potter. But I'm not going to try to compare and contrast the two, but I'm just kind of giving you a sense of how the two are different and what they're going for. The first book that I consider to be part of really the Lord of the Rings series, The Hobbit, is really interesting because it's not as dark or as grim as the other books in the series. It's a lot more child friendly. It's just designed to be this kind of kooky adventure, and is designed to sort of bring up the journey of the hero or the insignificant becoming something significant. So it again has those similar formulas that we've seen throughout various other stories and various other forms of media. But the interesting thing I think that Lord of the Rings, in particular the Hobbit prequel, brings up is the whole is how it just executes the whole hero's sort of journey. It does it in a very simplistic but still yet engaging way by having someone who's really not interested in adventure or doing anything out of the ordinary suddenly being put out there to sort of face the trials and tribulations of a journey and of going out there and having to take risks and facing consequences and things like that. Those concepts, I think, are what really make Lord of the Hobbit book really interesting as a story, as sort of a lead up to the series. I think they could have added in some. Again, I think Tolkien could have added in the more darker undertone, because again, this is really what the Lord of the Rings series is leading up to. I think it would only make sense to sort of end on a more on a less, I guess, positive note. But for the most part, it's really designed to be just a more kid-friendly, fun adventure book, even though there's a lot of things happening within it that do end up resulting into end up sort of dipping into the Lord of the Rings series, like Bilbo discovering the ring and things like that. You know, those dark elements, I think, could have been put into the story, especially if you're trying to make this, say, sort of lead up to the series. But again, I think it works, though, overall. It has that structure to, I think, draw the audience in. But again, it just all depends if you enjoy fantasy, if you like weird things happening and coming across various different things that are not part of this world or a little bit out of the ordinary, then you will definitely enjoy this book. But now discussing the Lord of the Rings series, it's basically a lot darker, but it is a bigger hero's journey. There's more stakes, there's more at risk, there's more consequences, there's more bloodshed, there's more it's just a lot grimmer story, and you do see this throughout all three books, which we start off with the Fellowship, the Two Towers, and then the Return of the King, and they basically sort of encapsulate what each story is about through their titles. Like the Fellowship of the Ring is about getting all of the people together to fight against the evil. And what is that evil? Well, it's basically the Lord of the Rings, Sauron, who manipulates all these different various races, again, elves, dwarves, men, to basically get power for the sake of having his own power. So he basically gives them all these rings and says, here you go, have some rings and you'll have power. And then really he says, haha, psych, this ring is actually more powerful than all of your guys' rings, so you're technically all under me. And so you have this huge battle, and as a result, the ring does not end up being destroyed, but ends up going in hiding. And hence we see the discovery of the ring and a fellowship of people, including elves, men, dwarves, and hobbits, go out and basically seek out to fight the evil. So that's really it's setting up the team. That's really what the first book is really designed to do. It's supposed to get all these characters together, all these people together, and discover what the problem is and set up a plan to try to solve the problem. The Two Towers, as being the middle book, its purpose is to sort of bring about the struggles along the way, basically. Again, the Fellowship of the Ring does highlight struggles within the beginning, and sort of at the end comes to an understanding of what needs to be done in order to stop the evil. But the Two Towers more focuses on how these groups of characters deal with the circumstances that are presented towards them. Now, since the ending of the Fellowship sort of changed things, and so we get this whole kind of different story, but and focus, but at the same time, it's still about trying to defeat that one evil guy, Sauron, or spirit, or I don't really know what you classify this guy as, but it's just this science guy, basically. But that's basically the second book within the trilogy. And then you get The Return of the King, which is basically about restoring order and restoring the good, and it's all about the restoration and the final battle, the final struggle, the final hall push, and it's all leading up to what eventually ends up resulting. So that's really how the books are structured, and it's a very interesting approach, I think. And again, there is, I think, a lot of culture. There's a lot of interesting commentary and themes, especially when it comes to race, which I find interesting. Like the different ways that men and elves and dwarves, their whole interaction, I think is really interesting. And then there's also other books that do focus on this Middle Earth, because again, most of Tolkien's works focused on this universe. So, but with the Lord of the Rings, I think it captured a lot of people because it did have these familiar things within it, but it also had a good structure in how it executed the books. Like it knew when to it knew what to do with the characters and knew what to do with the story. It progresses enough to the point where the audience, I think, can have a sense of satisfaction and really can learn various different things from. But there is a lot of thematic message. Is also about the nature of good and evil. That no person's again too small. Sort of like with the Hobbit being the one to really save the day, because that's what Frodo is designed to do. He's supposed to be the Hobbit that saves the day. And you have certain things like death and a loss of control, chaos, things like that, I think are really present throughout the stories. Now, as to their impact, I think it's very different than something like Harry Potter, because again, these books are a lot older than Harry Potter. These books have a lot more depth than Harry Potter. These books are a little bit more as fantasy books, they're designed to be about putting in as much detail as possible, and I think that's really what was focused on. And again, there is some kinds of things that do come up eventually that people can, criticize for, like, why didn't the Eagles come? That's a really big one. The one that always bothered me about the movies was when Elrond, who's supposed to be a main figure within the film, I don't know how prominent he is within the book, I can't exactly remember, but I do remember him knowing that the ring had the potential to be destroyed, but he didn't, go out and make sure that that was possible. And you see this in the way beginning, and you think, why didn't he do something? You watch that scene and you're just like, why? So I think there are certain things within the story where you can find like little loopholes that maybe Tolkien missed. Like, wait, how does that make sense? So again, there are maybe some things that are designed to be, again, more fantasy oriented and not as logical. But at the same time, I think it still works as a series. It still works as a literary classic series. I think there's a lot of interesting commentary that Tolkien's made, and there's a lot of different things you can pull from his works. Is it perfect? No, absolutely not. But I think at the same time it does offer something really unique, and I think it's definitely worth considering if you enjoy that kind of work. But I think that's really, though, ultimately all I can say about these books in general and sort of their impact. And I think a lot of people have drawn influence over them from these books over the years and have used them countless times to sort of draw inspiration from, and I think it only makes sense that there would be a series of films sort of dedicated to this series of books. But ultimately, I think that's really all I can say. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a great day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.